Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do another stay awake story off of Reddit, and it's called Something Was Killing the Chickens on Grandpa's Farm. I don't know if there's really much of any trigger warnings I could get out this early, so I'm just going to say trigger warning. There might be things in here that you might not like. Sorry, I don't know. I haven't really read it. So let's get started. So it goes, there's a whole world out there. You just have to look. My father had said that my whole life, but until about 5 years ago, I really didn't care. That was the year I went to stay with my grandfather on his chicken farm. But then I was 14, and like most stubborn teenagers on summer break, all I wanted to do was be lazy. Every day I slept till noon, and then at night I stayed up at least 2 a.m. In between those hours, I spent my time watching movies and playing video games. In fact, those two things were really all that mattered to me at that point in time. I wasn't very popular at my school, so I didn't have but one real friend, and he was gone that summer, and going out with girls wasn't an option either. They weren't interested in me, and consequently, I wasn't interested in them. So like I said, movies and video games were my life, and that was just fine with me. Unfortunately, my parents didn't feel the same way. Even before school was out, my dad was determined to plan a nice vacation for us to go on as a family, but every time he mentioned a destination, I wasn't interested. Eventually, that idea was dropped, thankfully. Then as summer arrived, my cat, thanks, please. I love you in a minute. Then as summer arrived, he and my mother switched their focus to planning weekend trips for us. Once again, not interested. This went on for a couple of weeks before my parents finally became fed up. One evening, my dad came up to my room and told me that, thanks, please. I love you, but please. Let me start that over again. One evening, my dad came up to my room and told me that we would be eating dinner as a family. Never looking up from the Call of Duty game I was playing, I told him I was busy and would grab something later. Typically, my folks would eat with each other in the dining room while I grabbed something quick and ate in my room. They tried to give me crap about it, but would usually back down and allow me to do my thing. This time, that didn't happen. Obviously, not all happy with my response, my dad walked over to the entertainment center, reached down, and then unplugged the surge protector. The TV, the Xbox, everything went dark. It's not a request, Zach, he said with frustration. It's an order. Now wash up and get your butt down there. Without another word, my father exited the room. As I stared daggers at him, I had spent all day on the game, and with one pull of the plug, I had lost good hours worth of progress. This is bullshit, I said, throwing the controller on the floor. It was just another excuse to push family time on me, and I didn't give one crap about any of that. Still, thoroughly pissed, I went into the bathroom and washed up before going downstairs. My parents were already seated at the table when I got there. Have a seat, son, my dad said, motioning to the empty chair across from me. Your mother has already taken the liberty of fixing you a plate. Looking down at the dish sitting in front of me, I was annoyed to see it contain pot roast, potatoes, carrots, and Brussels sprouts. Who in their right mind eats this crap, I thought to myself. I think I'll pass, I said defiantly as I stood up. I'll just make myself a sandwich. A look of fury settled across my father's face. You will sit back down right now, young man, Dad said with an angry but calm voice. You will eat everything that is on that plate, and in the meantime, you will listen without saying a word. Do I make myself clear? Looking at my mother, I hoped to see some sort of decision in her eyes in response to my dad's show of force. Instead, all I saw was a look of agreement. Apparently, I would find no ally there, so reluctantly, I did as I was told. As I ate, my parents told me about how they were tired of me wasting my time on useless things, that I was letting life pass me by when I had a whole world out there just waiting for me. I listened to them go on and on like that for what seemed like forever, and then they dropped the bomb. Your mother and I have decided you will be spending the rest of the summer helping your Grandpa John on the farm, my dad said with finality. Grandpa John was my mother's father. He lived a couple of hours away and had a pretty sizable chicken farm. My mom and her sister had grown up there, and they both claimed to have enjoyed their upbringing on the property, but I call BS. If it had been so great, why had they both settled in the city? There was no damned way in hell they would send me to stay there, but as I saw the seriousness on my dad's face, I had no choice but to wonder if he meant it. My dad continued, Friday morning, you'll get up at a reasonable time and pack a suitcase with enough clothes and anything else you'll need while away. This doesn't include your laptop, cell phone, or anything else related to video games, etc. You'll only pack clothing and toiletries. That's it. How could they do this to me? I wondered as I stared at the two of them. This wasn't fair, and I decided I was about to tell them so when my dad held up his hand. I don't want to hear anything you have to say about it, son. This is for your own good. You spend way too much time on these things, and you need a break from them. Besides, maybe you'll learn something from the experience. Fat chance of that happening, I thought. Will I at least get paid for this? I asked with contempt. Dad shook his head. Your grandpa wanted to, but your mother and I told him that wasn't necessary. Well, not only was my summer ruined by having to go to Podunk Land, but I had to do it for free. I couldn't believe this shit. Finishing my food as fast as I could, I left the table and then returned to my room. I thought about turning on my game again, but even that had lost its appeal for the time being. Instead, I went to bed. Laying there, I thought about everything that had just happened. I was being royally screwed. How could my parents be so terrible? I continued to stew over it when a new thought crept into my mind. They were bluffing. They were probably mad because I was uninterested in the desire for family fun, and were now trying to scare me straight. Well, it wouldn't work. Besides, most likely when Friday rolled around, the whole thing would be forgotten anyway. In the meantime, I played along with their game, and then called them out when it didn't happen. My folks thought they were so devious, but I knew better. Things would be just fine, I thought, as I fell asleep with a triumphant grin on my face. It wasn't a bluff. When my father came home Friday afternoon to my still unpacked suitcase, he wasn't too thrilled. Get it done, Zach, he told me, exasperated. Your grandpa's expecting us for dinner. Disbelief washed over me. They were actually serious. Begrudgingly, I began throwing things into the large piece of luggage, and I was almost finished when a stroke of brilliance hit me. I might not be able to bring my computer, Xbox, or cell phone, but I had one more trick up my sleeve. Walking over to my desk, I dug in one of the drawers and pulled out an old Nintendo DS. It had been a birthday present when I was younger, but had been forgotten once I received my first smartphone. Unzipping the suitcase liner, I grabbed one of my t-shirts and rolled the DS, a case of games, and the charger up in it. Then I placed the whole bundle inside before re-zipping the case's liner. Mom and Dad would never know it was there. A few minutes later, I came downstairs with my luggage, announcing I was ready. My father eyed me skeptically. I think I better check your suitcase, he said coolly. With arrogant confidence, I picked up my luggage, laid it on the couch, and then gestured at it with my hands in exaggerated, be my guess motion. Frowning, my dad began his search. He found nothing in any of the outer compartments but the usual toothbrush, toothpaste, and deodorant. Then moving on to the main section, Dad unzipped it and began removing its hastily packed contents. Once empty, he stared down at the suitcase as if disappointed by his lack of findings. With swelling pride, I watched as Dad began repacking my things, but then he hesitated. Moving aside the things he had already replaced, my father unzipped the liner, saw the bundle-up shirt, and removed it. My heart sank as he unrolled it. Without a word, Dad looked at me and shook his head. Then, setting my game and its accessories aside, he repacked the suitcase and then told me to load it in the car. The entire trip I spent sulking in silence as my parents cheerfully talked about the scenery and how good it was going to be to see Grandpa. Trying to tune them out, I thought about the man as well. Grandpa John and I had never been particularly close, and it had been over a year since I had seen him last. We talked on the phone occasionally, but it was never for more than a couple of minutes at a time. It wasn't that I didn't like the man or anything, I just didn't have a connection with him. To be honest, I guess I felt like he was way too old-fashioned for my blood. But the worst thing about the old man was his insistence on calling me by my full name, Zachary. I hated that with a passion. After what felt like the longest 2 hours ever, we pulled into Grandpa's driveway to find him sitting in an old rocking chair on the front porch. Standing, he watched us park and then came to greet us as we got out of the car. There's my little girl, Grandpa said happily as he folded his sun-marked arms around my mother. How are you doing, Elizabeth? Pretty good, Daddy, she replied, beaming. Have you been? Making it, I guess, sweetheart, Grandpa said, as he released Mom. "Daniel," he said, then looking at my dad, and then extending his hand. "How's life been treating you?" Firmly gripping Grandpa's hand, Dad gave it a hearty shake. "As good as can be expected, John. Been working like a dog mostly," he said with a grin. "You know how it is." Grandpa laughed merely. "That I do, Danny boy, that I do." The whole exchange was annoying, and I hated how much my parents could slip back into their former country-fried personas so easily. It was ridiculous. The three adults exchanged a few more pleasantries and then turned their attention to me. "Well, Zachary," Grandpa said as he fixed his sun-worn gaze on me, "I sure hope you brought your work gloves, son. We've got a good bit of work to do this summer." The old man and I continued staring at one another for a moment, but then he chuckled and gave me a strong pat on the back before turning his attention back to Mom and Dad. "What'd you say we all go in and get something in our bellies? Dinner's just about done." It had been a long road trip and I was more than hungry, so I gladly followed the three adults into the house. Unfortunately, my appetite shrank as I saw what was on the menu: meatloaf, steamed broccoli, and salad. It was going to be a long summer, but if anything, I checked some pounds because there was no way I was eating old people food the whole time. "Better get used to it, boy," Grandpa said after seeing the look on my face. "Ain't no fast food around here, just what I grow in the garden." After dinner, I sat in silence as the adults chatted back and forth. Other than the fact my parents were still dead set on me staying while they left for home the next morning, I had no interest in anything that was being said. More than once, I felt my grandfather's eyes on me. "Zachary, if you're bored with all this conversation, there's probably a good book over on the shelf there you can read," the old man said finally. With this interest, I looked at the man. Who in the hell would want to read a damn book? But it was better than nothing, so I stood up and walked over to the shelf anyway. A good many of the books in Grandpa's collection were by some guy named Louis if I mispronounce his name, I'm so sorry. L'Amour. And the covers showed images of cowboys and crap like that, and most everything else looked like religious stuff. No thanks there. Finally, I picked a book about some kid named Huckleberry Finn, and then sat back down at the table. "That's a good one," Grandpa said proudly. "You'll like it." Giving him my parents a skeptical look, I opened the book. "Give me a sec. Also, I've read Huckleberry Finn." Okay, let's move on. But I did read Huckleberry Finn in school. The next morning, my parents slept as Grandpa and I stood on the porch watching, and once out of sight, he pulled a calloused hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. "Well, we've seen him off some, but the day's wasting. We better see what Ezekiel's got going." With that, Grandpa stepped off the porch and I followed after him. Ezekiel, or Zeke, as he liked to be called, was a man Grandpa John had hired to help around the farm. He was in his mid to late 30s and had been working for my grandfather for the last year or so. He seemed okay, but something just felt off to me about the man. "What's wrong with him?" I asked Grandpa later on as he showed me around. The old man thought about it for a minute. "There ain't nothing wrong with him per se," Grandpa said, drawing out the words with his thick drawl. "Zeke's just slower than the rest of us is all, but he's a damn workhorse, he is. So I can't judge the fellow, 'cause he has a different way. You shouldn't either. I'm guessing Zeke has autism." I thought about that as I watched the younger man hoe the garden and stayed on my mind over the next few days. As Grandpa and I worked with him, I dismissed Zeke almost immediately because I thought he was weird, but to my grandfather, none of that mattered. He only saw a person that was a hard worker. After the first day, I found myself asking Grandpa questions about a lot of things. I didn't always understand some of the words he used, but the direct way he had of answering my queries was interesting to me. "I just don't see the need to be around the bush, is all," he stated when I asked him about it. We were picking vegetables in the garden and I looked at him confused. "What does that mean, Grandpa?" The old man grinned. "It means I don't like to bullshit people, grandson," he said with a good humor. "Look, Zach, every man deserves an honest answer, but not many of them are willing to listen. This hit me like a ton of bricks for 2 reasons. One, it was the first time Grandpa had actually called me Zach, and two, I realized I was one of the people he was talking about. Besides the no-nonsense way he had of saying things, I found out Grandpa was extremely patient too. It was the day after my parents had left, and the old man had just told me we were going to clean out the kitchen coop. Shaking my head, I told him I didn't play in crap and didn't plan on starting anytime soon. Grandpa just looked at me, turned, and then started for the barn. "Come on, son," he said over his shoulder. "Coop ain't going to clean itself with us standing here yakking." I stood there for another second and then followed. I continued testing the man's patience by dragging my feet as we worked, but it never fazed him. Later on, I asked why he never got mad when I gave him a hard time. "Life's too short to get bent out of shape over nothing," Grandpa replied. "Besides, I was your age once, spent more time than I'd have liked working on the farm for my pa. Of course, I'd have rather been out chasing the tail and getting in trouble, but things had to get done. So I know a thing or two about being frustrated." Hearing that coming from my grandfather was a revelation. Maybe we had more in common than I originally thought. As the weeks went by, I got used to and even started to enjoy my time on the farm. And I also began to get very close to my grandpa. During the day, he and I, along with Zeke, worked hard, but once the day's labor was done, we spent our evenings playing cards and dominoes, or I would sit and listen to the old man tell stories. It's good for a man to take in a little leisure after he's put in a long day working, Grandpa told me. The first night we sat down for our after-dinner activities. This and the occasional trip to the creek to go fishing became my favorite part of being there. Not because it was something fun to do, but because my grandfather made it more so. If there was one thing in those first few weeks that bothered me, it involved Zeke. Even though I had let go of my initial misgivings about the man, something still bothered me. While Zeke usually had lunch with us during the day, not once did he join us for dinner, let alone participate in our evening card or domino games. Instead, the man stayed holed up in the small camper trailer in which he lived on the backside of the property. He just likes to be to himself, Grandpa told me when I asked about it. "Don't let it worry you none, Zach." I tried to heed Grandpa's advice and drop it, but I just couldn't. Thankfully, a distraction presented itself soon enough. Unfortunately, it was at the expense of Grandpa's flock. We usually gather eggs at dawn, and I had decided that I would take the task on myself. It was during one of those early morning trips that I found the first 2 dead chickens, or what was left of them anyway. As I opened the door to the laying room that morning, I was met with 2 slimy piles of goop. "What the hell is that?" I said aloud. I'm actually going to stop here and it's going to be a 2-parter. Sorry. It's just a long story. So, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like or a thumbs up. If you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe and turn on the bell notification. I'll see y'all in part 2.